The morning sun filtered through the bus windows as Margaret Chen stood at the fare box, patting her coat pockets with growing concern. She was 62 years old, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit beneath her wool coat, her silver-streaked hair swept into an elegant bob. But at this moment, none of that mattered. Her wallet was missing. "I'm so sorry," she said softly to the driver, her cheeks flushing. "I seem to have left my wallet at home." Behind her, she could feel the impatient shuffling of other passengers. The driver, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, began to speak, but before she could, a gentle voice interrupted. "Here, let me help." Margaret turned to see a young man, perhaps in his late 20s, with warm brown eyes and a genuine smile. He wore a grey hoodie and carried a worn backpack over one shoulder. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and fed bills into the fare box for both of them. "Thank you," Margaret said, her voice catching slightly. "That's very kind. I don't know what happened to my wallet." "These things happen," the young man said with an easy shrug. "Don't worry about it." They found seats near each other as the bus lurched forward. Margaret settled by the window, and the young man sat across the aisle. She studied him discreetly. There was something refreshing about his unassuming manner, the way he helped without making a show of it. "I'm Margaret," she said, extending her hand across the aisle. "David," he replied, shaking it warmly. "David Miller." "Nice to meet you." "David Miller," she repeated thoughtfully. "Well, David, I truly appreciate what you did. It's not every day someone shows such simple kindness to a stranger." He smiled, a bit bashful. "My mom always said we're all just people trying to get through the day. Sometimes we need a little help." Margaret felt something stir in her chin, a mixture of warmth and melancholy. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," David said quietly. "She passed away 2 years ago." "I'm sorry," Margaret said, and she meant it. There was a pause, comfortable rather than awkward, as the bus rolled through the city streets. "What brings you out on the bus today?" David asked, clearly wanting to shift the conversation to lighter ground. Margaret hesitated. She could tell him the truth that she was Margaret Chen, CEO of Chen Industries, a manufacturing company worth $200 million, that her driver had called in sick, and rather than summon another car, she decided to take public transportation, something she hadn't done in nearly a decade. That somewhere between her penthouse and the lobby, she'd set down her small clutch and forgotten it. But something made her hold back. Maybe it was the genuineness in his eyes, or the way he'd helped her without knowing who she was. When was the last time someone had simply been kind to her without wanting something in return? "Just headed downtown," she said simply. "And you?" "Work," David said. "I'm a carpenter. We're renovating an old building on 5th Street. It's honest work, and I love it. Working with my hands, seeing something take shape." His face lit up as he spoke. "There's something satisfying about restoration, taking something broken or worn down and making it beautiful again." Margaret found herself genuinely interested. "That sounds wonderful. Do you work for a company?" "Small family business," David explained. "My uncle's shop. We mostly do custom furniture and restoration projects. Doesn't pay much, but I enjoy it." He paused, then added with a self-deprecating grin, "Which is good, because I'm still paying off my student loans." "You went to college?" Margaret asked. 2 years of business school," David said, "but it wasn't for me. I was sitting in classrooms learning about profit margins while my hands were itching to build something real. So I left, learned carpentry, and I've been happy ever since." He looked at her curiously. "What about you? What do you do?" "I work in business," Margaret said carefully. "Manufacturing sector." "Interesting," David said, and he seemed to genuinely mean it. "Is it fulfilling?" The question caught her off guard. When was the last time someone had asked her that? People asked about profits, about market share, about quarterly projections. But fulfilling? "It's complicated," she said slowly. "I've spent 40 years building something, and there's satisfaction in that, but sometimes I wonder if I've missed other things along the way." David nodded thoughtfully. "My uncle says that all the time. He loves his work, but he regrets not traveling more when he was younger, not spending more time with his kids when they were small." He looked out the window. "I guess balance is the hardest thing to build." They talked easily as the bus continued its route. David told her about the bookshelf he was building for his sister, about his small apartment where he was slowly teaching himself to cook better meals. Margaret found herself sharing stories she hadn't thought about in years, her grandmother teaching her to play chess, the garden she used to keep before her life became too busy. "This is my stop," David said eventually, standing as the bus slowed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a slightly worn business card. "Listen, I know you said you lost your wallet. If you need any help getting home or anything, here's my number, and don't worry about the bus fare. Consider it my good deed for the day." Margaret took the card, her fingers brushing his briefly. "Thank you, David." "Really?" He smiled that genuine smile again. "Take care, Margaret. I hope the rest of your day goes better." And then he was gone, stepping off into the morning crowd. Margaret sat holding his card, reading it. David Miller, Custom Carpentry and Restoration. A phone number. Nothing fancy, just simple and honest, like the man himself. She stayed on the bus past her stop, thinking, when had her world become so small, so insulated? When had she last met someone who saw her simply as Margaret, not as CEO Chen, not as a business opportunity, not as a networking contact? That evening, in her penthouse apartment, Margaret found her wallet exactly where she'd left it, on the kitchen counter. She could have called her driver at any point that day. She could have identified herself on the bus, made calls, had everything handled. But she was glad she hadn't. She looked at David's card, now sitting on her desk. Part of her knew she should simply send him a check, thank him properly for his kindness, and move on. That would be the professional thing to do. But another part of her, a part she'd almost forgotten existed, wanted something different. The next morning, Margaret dialed his number. "Hello?" David's voice came through, slightly breathless. "David, this is Margaret, from the bus yesterday." "Oh, hi, Margaret. Is everything okay? Did you get home all right?" His immediate concern for her well-being made her smile. "Everything's fine. I found my wallet when I got home, but I wanted to properly thank you, and I was wondering. Your uncle's shop, do you take on private commissions?" "Sure," David said. "What did you have in mind?" "I have a very old desk," Margaret said, which was true. "It belonged to my grandfather. It's been in storage for years because it needs restoration. I'd like to have it fixed." "I'd be happy to take a look at it," David said warmly. "When works for you?" They arranged to meet that Saturday at the storage facility Margaret actually did have. She wasn't lying about the desk. It was real. It had been her grandfather's, and it did need work. She just hadn't thought about it in 20 years. When Saturday came, Margaret dressed casually, a jeans and a sweater, something she rarely wore. She arrived at the storage unit to find David already there, waiting by his truck. "Good morning," he said, smiling. "Ready to show me this desk?" The piece was beautiful even in its deteriorated state, a solid mahogany with intricate carvings, decades of neglect evident in its scratched surface and loose joints. David circled it slowly, running his hands over the wood with something like reverence. "This is incredible craftsmanship," he said softly. "Look at these joints, the detail work. They don't make things like this anymore." "Can you restore it?" Margaret asked. "It'll take time," David said, "but yes, absolutely. It would be an honor." He looked at her. "This must mean a lot to you." "It does," Margaret said, and realized she meant it. "My grandfather taught me to think strategically, to plan ahead. He'd sit at this desk working, and he'd let me sit with him, teach me chess, talk to me about life." She smiled at the memory. "He always said the most valuable things in life weren't things at all." "He sounds like he was a special person," David said he was. They talked pricey. David quoted something remarkably reasonably and arranged for him to pick up the desk the following week. But as they were parting, David hesitated. "Margaret, I hope this isn't too forward, but would you like to grab coffee now? I mean, there's a good cafe tilde copy right around the corner." Margaret's heart did an unexpected flutter. When was the last time someone had asked her to coffee? When was the last time she'd said yes? "I'd like that," she said. The cafe tilde copyright was a small, warm place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. They ordered it. David insisted on paying, though Margaret had to suppress the urge to laugh, knowing what she could afford, and settled into a corner booth. "So," David said, wrapping his hands around his mug, "tell me more about yourself. You said you work in manufacturing, but what do you actually do?" This was the moment. Margaret knew she should tell him the truth, but the truth would change everything, wouldn't it? He'd see her differently. The easy warmth between them might become complicated by the vast difference in their circumstances. "I'm in management," she said instead, which was technically true. They talked for 2 hours. David told her about his dreams of maybe opening his own shop someday, about the small house he hoped to buy and fix up, about his sister's kids whom he adored. Margaret found herself sharing things she rarely discussed: her love of classical music, her regret at not learning to paint, her growing sense that success and happiness weren't always the same thing. "You know what I think?" David said at one point. "I think you're at a crossroads. I think you've been so focused on work that you've forgotten there are other things worth doing." "You might be right," Margaret admitted. "My mom used to say that life isn't about what you accumulate." David continued. "It's about the moments that take your breath away, the people who make you laugh, the times you help someone or they help you. That's what matters." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. "Your mother was very wise." "She was," David said softly. "I miss her every day, but I try to live the way she taught me." Over the following weeks, Margaret and David fell into an easy pattern. He worked on the desk at his uncle's shop, and she'd stop by sometimes to see the progress. They'd grab lunch, take walks, talk about everything and nothing. Margaret found herself smiling more, laughing more. David had a gentle humor and a way of seeing beauty in ordinary things. He'd point out the way light fell through autumn leaves, or stop to admire an old building's architecture, or share a story about a funny thing one of his nephews had said. He never pressed her about her life, never seemed to find it odd that she kept certain details vague. He simply enjoyed her company, and she his. But the deception was beginning to weigh on her. One evening, as they walked through a park, David said, "Can I tell you something?" "Of course," Margaret said. "I really enjoy spending time with you," he said, not looking at her. "I know we haven't known each other very long, but there's something about you. You're different from anyone I've met. You're interesting and thoughtful, and you actually listen when people talk. That's rare." Margaret's heart ached. "Davida, I guess what I'm saying is, I'd like to keep getting to know you. If you're interested." She stopped walking, turned to face him. He looked nervous and hopeful, this kind young man who'd given her bus fare without a second thought, who'd shown her a gentleness she'd forgotten could exist. "I need to tell you something," Margaret said quietly, "about who I am." She told him everything, about Chen Industries, about the $200 million, about the fact that she could have paid him back the bus fare 1,000 times over but had been afraid that if he knew who she was, everything would change. David listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, there was a long silence. "Say something," Margaret whispered. David let out a long breath. "Honestly, I'm trying to process this." He ran a hand through his hair. "You're a millionaire CEO." "I am," Margaret said. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner." "Why didn't you?" he asked, not accusingly, but genuinely curious. "Because when you helped me on that bus, you weren't helping CEO Chen. You were helping Margaret, a woman who'd lost her wallet." And felt It felt wonderful to just be Margaret again, not the company, not the portfolio, not the business deals, just me. David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I gave you $2 for bus fare." "You did." And suddenly, incredibly, he laughed. "I gave a millionaire CEO $2 for the bus." Margaret found herself laughing too, relief flooding through her. "You did, and it was the kindest thing anyone has done for me in years." David shook his head, still smiling. "So all this time, while I've been talking about maybe someday buying a house, about saving up for a better truck, I've been thinking about how refreshing it is to talk to someone who sees value in things that can't be bought." Margaret finished. "David, you have something I lost somewhere along the way. You have contentment, you have purpose, you have kindness that comes naturally, not because it's strategic or beneficial." "But you're a CEO," David said, still processing. "You're successful, powerful. Why would you want to spend time with a carpenter who's still paying off student loans?" "Because you make me laugh," Margaret said simply. "Because you help strangers without expecting anything in return. Because you see beauty in restoring old things. Because when I'm with you, I remember who I used to be before I became so focused on building an empire that I forgot to build a life." David looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "The desk is almost done. I was going to surprise you, but since we're being honest, I carved something into one of the drawers, a quote from my mom. The richest people are those who understand that wealth is measured in moments, not money." Margaret felt tears spill over. "That's beautiful." "She'd have liked you," David said softly. "The real you, Margaret, not CEO Chen." "They're the same person," Margaret said. "Or they used to be." "I think I'd forgotten that." David took her hand. "So what happens now?" "I don't know," Margaret admitted. "This is uncharted territory for me. I'm 62 years old, set in my ways, used to controlling every variable." "And you're 29 yet." "28, David corrected with a slight smile. "Even worse," Margaret said, but she was smiling too. "People will talk. They'll say terrible things. They'll assume the worst. Let them." David said, "My mom also taught me that other people's opinions are none of my business." "I run a major company," Margaret continued. "I have responsibilities, obligations. My life is complicated. I race toward broken things," David said. "It's what I do." Margaret laughed through her tears. "I'm not broken." "No," David agreed, "but maybe you're a little worn down. Maybe you need someone to help sand away the rough patches, bring out the natural grain underneath." "That's a terrible metaphor," Margaret said. "I know," David admitted. "I'm a carpenter, not a poet." They stood there in the fading evening light, an unlikely pair, a millionaire CEO and a carpenter, connected by a simple act of kindness on a city bus. "I don't know where this goes," Margaret said honestly. "I don't know how to navigate this." "Neither do I," David said, "but maybe that's okay. Maybe we just take it one day at a time. No strategies, no 5-year plans, just two people who enjoy each other's company, figuring it out as we go." Margaret thought about that. For 40 years, she'd planned everything, calculated every risk, anticipated every outcome, and she'd been successful. But had she been happy? "One day at a time," she repeated. "That's terrifying." "Yeah," David agreed, "but also kind of exciting, right?" And looking at him, at this kind, genuine young man who'd helped a stranger without hesitation, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in years. "Hope." "It is," she said. "It really is." David squeezed her hand. "So, we're doing this, we're seeing where it goes?" "We're doing this," Margaret confirmed. "But David, you should know my world can be difficult. There will be scrutiny, judgment. People will say things. Then we'll face it together," David said simply. As they walked back through the park, Margaret realized that the most valuable thing she'd received that day on the bus wasn't the $2 for fare. It was the reminder that the best things in life are kindness, connection, genuine human warmth that couldn't be bought at any price. They were freely given, by people like David, who understood that true wealth had nothing to do with bank accounts and everything to do with how you treated your fellow travelers on this journey through life. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, a simple gesture of kindness on an ordinary morning could change everything.